Hello, this is Warhammer Workshop, and here is my Let's Paint Necromunda Bulkhead Doors. On screen, you can see we are starting with reference photos. Finding reference photos is one of the most important early steps. Here are 5 photos of the product in question, painted by other people. The first is Games Workshop itself, and the rest, I believe, are made by individuals/other companies. First, you need to figure out the look you want, namely the type of metal/material the bulkhead doors are going to be. I will be going for something in between the first top and first bottom, this being starting with a black base layer and building up an iron/steel look with silver paints. The other reference photos are for details such as hazard stripes, lighting, rust and so forth. Now, once you have enough information to start the painting process, you can move on to the product itself. On screen you can see all the parts from the set, 14 pieces in total, 4 hatch/airlock doors and 10 bulkhead doors, or as will be the case for me, wall panels. 6 of them are without doors and 4 have inset doors. You can also see a pile of clips. They are the feet which help them stand freely, and you also get locks for the airlock doors, both arm locks and circular locks. Here I have one of the wall panels or bulkhead doors with an inset door, and I have glued the clips in place. They glue easily and they fit perfectly. I suggest you paint all of your bulkhead doors together, or at least each step in the process together. In my case, I don't have all my bulkhead doors yet, so I'm just going to complete this one and paint the rest together later. I started with around 4 layers of extremely thin black paint. All paints are from Games Workshop and almost all brushes are as well. I will not attempt any of the GW names, and I will put the paint, its name and type on screen in the top left, as well as the brush used and the number of layers applied, and also whether it was thin or thick. This system means you can pause on any given picture within my Let's Paint videos and see what paint was used, what type of paint, the brush that was used, and how many layers were applied to give you a good idea of just how to achieve the result/technique yourself. I'm going to call this technique base shading. It's the technique I'm using for this bulkhead door. I cover around 97% of the plastic with black paint, and I will go over 100% of it with a shade afterwards, covering all the black and unpainted plastic. This will ensure that I cover 100% of the plastic without losing any detail. It is common to lose detail or at least clog up areas by painting every single part, sometimes going over the same point with too many layers of paint or painting on one thick layer. And it will also give a bit of shading. Also, one of the great advantages of doing 4 or 5 extremely thin layers of paint is that they dry very quickly, and this means they dry evenly as well. And it's very difficult this way to leave fingerprints and to get paint everywhere and leave thumbprints and so on, because the paint simply dries too quickly for problems to occur. Okay, I have now gone over 100% of the wall/bulkhead door with this shade paint. I did one thin layer of shade over 100% of the piece. I used a medium shade brush for this. After the base layer and shade layer, I dry brushed a silver. I used the silver dry paint for this, and I used the medium dry brush. And if you're going to be dry brushing naturally, the thing you are dry brushing needs to be completely dry first. I built up thin layers of the silver using the dry brush technique. Putting a small amount of paint on your brush, a flat type of brush works best, and then brushing most of it off onto some paper, leaving only a small amount of paint on your brush. This is so when you paint back and forth with the brush, the small amount of paint on the bristles will only transfer in small amounts to the edges and most raised areas. It's just a form of highlighting. It's more general and rough compared to edge highlighting. I did this for a few layers until I got to the level of metal that I wanted. I then gave it all another layer of the shade paint to darken the silver and make it dirtier. If you want to darken it and blend it more, you will need several layers. To completely cover all the plastic and to give build-up of dirt in the deepest areas and to add corrosion, I went over all the exposed plastic and recesses with a corrosion paint. I also covered most of the base of the piece, and I went around all the mechanisms too, like the padlock and door handle. I also used a small layer brush for the small areas. Now I used the rust paint to create small amounts of rust and to hide any mistakes I made, such as not being careful enough with the dry brushing. And since rust is orange, it will also give some contrast and break up all the blacks, browns and silvers. It will add a bit of life and colour. I also used a bit of sponge for this. So this wall won't match the others, it seems. therefore I will use it for something else. Since I'm going to have 15 in total, losing one won't make a huge difference. Now we have too much orange, I'm going to add other colours and this will break it up. Which brings us on to the final things to do, the details. The hardest part if you don't have a steady hand, and it's one of the fun parts too, unless it goes wrong then it's one of the worst. But this part is certainly when it all starts to come together and you get some real colour and realism involved. We have lights, number pads, wires, pipes, doors, graffiti and so on. There will be reds, greens, blues, yellows and some purple. First I painted the door. I based the door with base red, 3 thin layers. As you can see, it has already broken up the orange and silver really well. I then covered the red with a thin layer of the shade to darken it and add shadow around the edge. Next I began adding chips and scratches to the door. First I literally chipped the paint by scratching some of it off with a metal sculpting tool. I did this in small areas all the way down to the plastic. Once again I added too much at this stage, but it's really up to you how chipped it is. I used the old Games Workshop's metal sculpting tool. Then I carefully painted over the small chips. I used a small brush for this and the paint is a beige. I didn't do a perfect job of this and I think I have a few too many chips. You really need to build up each step very slowly with tiny amounts of paint. I then put a small amount of the corrosion paint in the centre of the beige and this gives me a quick and easy chip effect. I used a tiny brush for this, but you can also use the tip of the small layer brush. Now I'm going to add paint to the panel sections because those areas seem wrong, not to mention it will remove most of the rust. So I added a black to the top and bottom panels, 3 layers with the black here to bring it to a solid colour, and then I added yellow to the left and right panels, 4 layers with a medium brush to bring it to a nearly solid yellow. And to darken it and add shadow I covered all 4 panel sections with a lighter shade. Now onto the light. I'm going to make all the lights blue, however there will be 3 which are off and they will be red. I'm going to turn this into a game mechanic, so if a character is under one of the red lights it means they can't be seen by the other characters. We will see how that ends up in the coming weeks. I put this light on, meaning I painted it blue. First I based the entire light, including the cage around it, with base blue, the darkest blue I have. I also went around the edge with the blue to create source lighting. It's quite hard to make a good source light with a brush, but you can just kind of stipple around the light with a small amount of paint on the brush. I then painted over most of the dark blue with a lighter blue, but only towards the centre of the light and the cage. Then I painted over most of the lighter blue with an even lighter blue, focusing towards the very centre. I used a medium base brush for this. I then went over the whole light using a glaze type paint to make it shiny and to help give the illusion of light. Next are the pipes. The small one will be iron/silver and the large one will be bronze/. I started with the small pipe and then the large bronze pipe. I then put a thick layer of shade over both pipes to darken them, dull them down and to give shadow. After the pipes I painted the number pad. I started with a bright green. It's a layer paint and I applied 2 thin layers across the surface of the number pad. Then I used a lighter green and a tiny brush to paint just in the top left corners of each number pad. And then I covered the whole number pad using a glaze type paint. The one I used before, only green instead of blue. This will give a shiny look. Now onto the wires. I painted the first wire a light green and the second wire a dark purple. Once again I went over both wires with the shade to darken them and blend them to the shadows. The only thing left is the skull, which I painted in the same beige paint I used before. Then I gave it a layer of shade. For the eye I used the dark red I used for the door and covered the entire eye, including the metal edge, to give the sense of glow/light. I then painted just the eye with a lighter red. I then highlighted the skull by going over the raised parts with the beige, and then finally I covered the eye using a red shade paint to make it shiny. And here it is completed, well at least as completed as it's going to be for this video. This is a way in which you can paint the Necromunda Bulkhead Doors. This has been a Let's Paint with Warhammer Workshop. Thank you for watching.